So good morning, my name is Colleen Layman. As Peter said, I am an engineer, so I think that I'm allowed to say that. This is that engineers in general do not like change. It's just in our nature, we don't like change very well. So it is kind of tough on the engineering community because whether we like it or not, change is coming. It's coming at an ever rapid pace. And I'll be honest, I think engineers and the industry in general is really struggling to deal with that change. And the changes in technology, technology is really what's driving this change. So as I look around the engineering community back at when I first came out about 20 some years ago, and I look at what engineers are doing today and the challenges they're facing today, it doesn't look a lot like it did in the mid-90s when I first got into the industry. We spent a lot of time really digging into the data, really doing a lot of research that today things have changed. So I don't want to predict the future because I don't have a crystal ball up here, that's pretty much impossible. But I want to highlight on a few trends that I think are relevant to our discussion today, as well as trends that I think are very important for the way the industry is changing. Peter only gave me a few minutes to talk, so I can't hit on everything. So I'll do my best to hit some of the highlights. So like I said, change is coming. And one of the first big things that I see changing is really a deluge of data. We're getting more and more data. As I mentioned, I came out to the engineering workforce. I've been working in industry for 20 plus years. When I came out in the 1990s, you spent a lot of time looking for data, looking for relevant information. You called people on the phone, you tracked down the experts in offices, you talked to vendors, you dug through textbooks. Well, we don't do that now. Now I've got more data I can get more information at the tips of my fingers instantaneously. And I think we're really struggling to figure out what to do with that. If you just look out there and you look at things like WebMD and the amount of time somebody says something like, I'm going to go Google this, get the information I need, you can see that it's really changing the way we do business. So for engineers who used to wait for the phone to ring and your client called you and says, I have this problem, and your job was to go dig up the information for them and solve the problem, that's not happening anymore. Our clients are going out there and they are Googling something, getting the information they need, and solving the problem. So we're really looking as engineers, kind of our role changing, and with that our skill set's going to have to change. So we're going from being those technical experts, from the guys who pick up the phone and solve that problem, to being really data managers, having to go out there, go through all of this data that's out there now, figure out what's relevant, figure out what's important, analyze that data, and kind of come up with solutions to problems our clients don't even know they have yet. So this is really taking a big shift in the skill set from a discipline that didn't really focus on communication skills and on people management skills and focus more on technology to now us really needing to be stronger in our communication skills. So the second one is really changing demographics. And I did a little kind of very interested in the way the world demographics are changing. And we're going to hit about 8.5 billion people by the year 2030 when Peter has this presentation set up for. So you told me to imagine 2030, so I'm imagining 2030. And it's very interesting because most of that growth is going to be outside developed nations. Africa alone is supposed to account for about 50% of our population growth. And if you predict out even further, I looked at the demographics in the United States, since that's where I do most of my business, and they're saying by the year 2050 that they're expecting that we'll hit that point where just about almost less than half of the population is going to be non-white, which is a complete shift in demographics in the U.S. And so what does this really mean? This means that engineers are going to be required to develop solutions that are acceptable to a really changing demographic, to a more diverse population. And different cultures, different people think different ways. So we really need to step up our diversity and inclusion in the diversity and inclusion area, step up those efforts to figure out how to get that diverse population, how to get that engineering community to really have those same experiences as the world community, have those things in common, look like the people that they're trying to serve so that they can adequately develop solutions for those people. You don't understand the way those people think, you don't understand how the community thinks, you can't come up with an adequate solution to solve their challenges. So I think that's one of the challenges we're facing in the future. Also, the size of our world is shrinking, and technology expands our ability to communicate, and that's fabulous. But at the same time, it shrinks down our world, and it really brings with us challenges. So for the last probably 10 or 15 years in my career, we've been really working on how to work collaboratively, how to work with offices overseas, how to collaborate and really move into a work sharing environment. Well, that's kind of just the first step. Now, in order to be successful, the engineer really needs to start understanding global markets, starting to understand more of a global, more of a political and social context with everything that they are dealing with. Something that we didn't have to do before, something that they didn't learn in school. As we already see when we talk about a lot of environmental issues, when we talk about things like climate change, shrinking water supplies, everything that you do locally is now more assessed on a global scale. The impacts of what you do, say building a power plant in the Midwest, is assessed on how those emissions are going to affect other parts of the world. We don't operate in that narrow view anymore. So this is really some of the things that the engineers are going to have to deal with in the future, is really thinking in that global context instead of my project right in front of me. And that's a big transition for most of us. So as I mentioned this before, this is not a comprehensive list. Peter didn't let me talk long enough. But a final trend that I really want to hit on, because I think it's huge, is the power of political and social forces. How many have read the book or seen the movie The Circle? Everybody see that with Tom Hanks? Oh man, it was a good movie. You should see it. But I think if you know anything about it, what the movie really does is it highlights to us the impact that social forces and the impact of social media that they're having on the way people think and the way people view a problem. If you look at anything like the Dakota Pipeline, controversy around the Dakota Pipeline, the Flint water crisis, for those of you who are familiar with coal ash impoundment closures, we had a Dan's River, coal ash came into the river. Now we're dealing with the aftermath and closing coal ash facilities around the country. If you look at the impact that social media and that social forces and political forces really are having on the way we're solving those challenges or moving forward in the industry and coming up with solutions, you can see how this is really having an impact on the way the engineer does business. And again, this is a change from the skill set of an engineer. They are not engineered, they are not taught to think in terms of political forces, in terms of economics. They're designed to solve a technical problem. That's what we teach them. So this future of the profession, really how do professional associations fit in? As Peter mentioned, I've been with the Society of Women Engineers probably approaching 20 years now, and I'm currently sitting on the ISA Board of Directors as well. So I think that there's a huge role for associations to really fit in and help fill some of these gaps and really help develop the engineer for the future. And I read somewhere this quote, it says, the future of the profession is in many ways the result of the choices that we're making today and how the profession is successful. So I think the good news for associations is that they tend to be more flexible, they tend to be more nimble, they tend to really do well in times of change and uncertainty. And there's real opportunity here for associations to be the change that they want to see in the world. So the first role that I see for associations, and I have to say this because Peter tells me, is I look through my lens, I looked at that diversity and inclusion lens, and I think that this is a huge role that associations play in really making sure that the engineering profession more closely reflects our changing demographics. And I think it's all about bringing the best minds to the problem, best minds to solve the problem. And we really need to evolve that to solve these challenges that were coming up, making sure that all different cultures, socioeconomic standings, age, gender, all of that is really representing and developing the solutions, because that's what our population looks like. It's diverse. To solve the problem for that population, you need to look like it. So I think associations, with their ability to really reach into schools, a lot of their efforts are grassroots, really getting into the community. Also with a lot of collegiate chapters and sections, there's the ability to really get in there and help be the driving force in making sure that the next generation of engineers looks like what we want it to look like, but by providing more diverse role models, by providing outreach in the community. One of the things that I kind of wanted to highlight here is, if you take a look at the demographics in engineering, our problem, and I'm going to talk a lot about the women in engineering because that's where a lot of my graphics come from. We've been starting to get more folks into engineering programs, particularly women. We've been getting more women into programs. The problem is, if you look at the chart, they're just not staying. So that we're starting to shift the focus from one of attracting women in engineering into one of making sure they stay. What's going on in the workplace that they are not wanting to stay? So I think associations play a role in partnering with industry in figuring out why aren't women staying, or why aren't other minority groups staying, or why aren't they entering the industry, and helping them get that data so they can develop a better workplace, a more desirable workplace for people to want to work in. I think that that's really important, is changing the culture of the workplace. So, there it goes. Okay, so secondly, I think the change in technology, increasingly advancing technology, really changes the skill set of the engineer. I think I mentioned that before. Associations are really great in helping engineers with their continuing education as well, not just the technical side and staying up to date on the latest trends, which I think is a huge role associations play. But I also think they play a huge role in helping to develop those other skills that engineers are going to need to be successful in this changing world, in this global workforce. Things like communication skills, public speaking skills, just being able to work in teams. I think the value of association is huge in there as we go from an engineer who is a technical expert or as a designer to someone who is a data manager or a solution provider and is really focused working more and more in multidisciplinary teams. That's what we're going to need to solve the big challenges of the world, are those multidisciplinary teams. People got to learn to listen to each other and communicate with each other. Speaking from my personal experience with a couple different associations, I think that this is something that associations do well and can continue to develop and really fill this gap. So I've been with the Society of Women Engineers. I think it's provided me a great arena to test and challenge myself, but also to provide me with those softer skills. Learn how to communicate, learn how to work in teams, learn how to solve complex challenges that don't really seem complex when you're working on them in this level, but providing me those skills so I can take it and apply it to industry where the challenges are larger. Oops, I have to go. Thought I had another slide in there, but I guess I don't. So I think the third and last challenge, or the last thing I want to hit on today, is really the role associations play related to public policy and to education. There is a lot of misinformation out there, particularly in the science community. You get a big headline, and I can Google and find, example, Flint water crisis. I can Google and I can find so much information, half of which is probably true, another half of which is absolutely not completely true, and another half of which is about half and half true. I think associations play a huge role in helping to provide those technical experts to our politicians and policymakers. I think this is extremely important. Industry is inherently biased in this area. There's inherently some type of conflict of interest if you work in a certain industry, if you're a company and you want to provide information to politicians. I think this is the area for associations to really fill that gap and make sure that they're providing the technical information, being those go-to experts for unbiased technical information to provide to our politicians and policymakers. In connection with that is really the area of public education. We've all been kind of tainted in our brain with the image that the popular media has presented of the engineer. There's Dilbert, there is the guy with the pocket protector who looks down at his feet every time he talks to a woman, who sits in his cubicle all day solving complex problems that are so obscure out to the 10 significance figure. That's the image that we've been colored in our head from our youth of what an engineer looks like. And I think that associations are the people who really need to change this role, or change this worldview for the next generation of what an engineer looks like. When I was in high school and I was debating what I was going to do with my life, I went to Catholic school, so I had a nun who explained to me that I needed to be an engineer. And I said, "Sister, I don't know what an engineer is." And she says, "Honey, that's someone who changes the world." I think that that's the image that we need to make sure we're presenting to the community, that engineers or scientists are people who change the world and make it a better place. And I think that that's something for associations that they can do really well and play a good hand in that, just with their ability to get into the community and work with the community. So I'd like to thank you for your time today, and I'm looking forward to discussing this more on the panel, and I will turn it over to Judy. Are you next?
Yep.